Welcome everyone to the Canarian International Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Mossy and I am an alcoholic.
And I am also an alcoholic, and my name is Mick.
We were both serving as your secretary today. Could you join us for a moment's silence to remember the still suffering alcoholic both inside and outside the room? And who's on the preamble, Mick?
Kathleen.
Kathleen, have you got it there, Kathleen?
Yeah. My name is Kathleen and I'm an alcoholic. Preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problems and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organisation or institute. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any cause. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Thank you, Kathleen. A very warm welcome goes out to any newcomers or anyone returning to Alcoholics Anonymous.
The chat is now disabled until the end of the meeting, except for meeting hosts. At that, our speaker today is a gentleman that I've heard speak already. I'm looking forward to this, and I'm sure you are too. Is Lyle P. You're very welcome. You've whatever time it takes to do your thing, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Mousy. I appreciate being here with everybody. Wow, this is really a worldwide collection of folks. So, and that's neat. My name's Lyle. I'm an alcoholic. I was at my weekly men's meeting this morning, which is my home group. And as I sat there, I kept thinking about the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous and what it's meant in my life for the last 34 years. I also want to start this. My sobriety date, by the way, is March the 7th of 1990. But combined with that thought that I had is another thought, and that is the remembrance of my introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous in 1975, which had a completely different aspect and attitude about it. I was ordered into AA for a year when I was living in Minnesota, and I got a DWI up there. You know, in the States here we have DWIs, DUIs. Usually it's DUI, but driving under the influence. In Minnesota it was DWI, driving while influenced or while intoxicated. And in 1975, while that was not a fun experience, it wasn't an earth-shattering, career-ending event. I had friends who had DWIs, and so I did what they did. I got an attorney, and we went to court, and I expected the same outcome that they always had, was a $300 fine and a ticket for careless driving. I went in there full expectation of that. And instead, this judge said, well, I'll do that, but only after you've gone to AA for a year. That was completely unexpected. I'd never heard of that occurring before. And I was really angry about it, extremely angry about it. I saw absolutely no reason for that. I saw no connection between a DWI and a forced year of attendance at AA. And initially, I wasn't going to do it. And I changed my mind. At that point in time, the FAA here in the United States was not cross-checking pilot licenses with driving records. So that was not a factor. And I just decided that I probably didn't want that on my record since I was a young co-pilot at Northwest Airlines. So I very angrily, very begrudgingly agreed to do this year in AA. And I went to an AA meeting and I sat there completely, you know, like we all are when you go into the first AA meeting. It was a foreign place. I didn't expect to be there. I looked around. I sat, I watched, I listened, and it took me about 5 minutes to reach a very solid conclusion that this whole thing about Alcoholics Anonymous was a cult. And these people that could talk about nothing other than alcohol and drinking were obviously cult members. And I very clearly did not belong in that group. And I came home and I told my wife that. And and I really didn't like this whole. I mean, had nothing but contempt and scorn for Alcoholics Anonymous and the people in it. I saw there was just nothing positive about it that I saw. So I quickly figured out a way to beat the system. I think I was mandated to attend 3 AA meetings a week or something like that. So every time we landed someplace, I didn't care what city it was in the United States. I'd go before I even get out of uniform in my hotel room. I'd pick up the phone book and I'd look up the local Alcoholics Anonymous address and phone number. And so I would create a fictitious meeting around this place, furnishing the address and the phone number, and knowing that they couldn't check it. And I'm turning in stacks of meetings that I'm creating but not attending. It's all fictitious. And I would tell my wife that I probably need to go to 1 meeting a month where we were living, just in case somebody needed to say they saw me there. And I really I really hated AA. I really did, and the people in it. And I wasn't shy. I wasn't shy about letting them know. And of course, somebody would say something to me or call me out on something, and I didn't like that. My first reaction instinct was something of a violent nature, and I knew that if I did that, the word would get back to the judge, and that wouldn't be good. So I would just have to bite my lip and suffer through it. It was the longest hour of my life. I'd rather have somebody pull a fingernail out than have to go to an hour of AA. And I would come home from that meeting and I would be so angry. I just have smoke coming out of my ears. I'd walk in my house and I'd tell my wife, that's the most effed up bunch of people I've ever seen in my entire life. I said, my God Almighty. I said, I sit there and these people have lost their homes, their cars, their wives, their jobs, their kids, everything else. And I said, and they sit around and talk about it for an hour. I said, for God's sake, I said, let's have a drink. And I'd mix the strongest drink that I could possibly choke down just so I could calm down and chill out from my AA meeting. So that's the way I did my first year of AA in 1975. And I managed to get through the year doing that. And I maintained that attitude for 15 more years until the morning of March the 8th of 1990, when I was involved in an incident that made national news here in the United States. As a matter of fact, it even got to England and other places in Europe and a couple of places in Asia, because I heard about it from people over there. But on that morning, an event took place that had never occurred on a public level, and that is 3 airline pilots were arrested for having flown from Fargo, North Dakota to the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul International Airport under the influence of alcohol. I was arrested that morning, along with the other 2 crew members, and subsequently I became the first pilot in American commercial aviation history to be arrested, tried, convicted, sentenced, and sent to federal prison for flying a commercial airliner under the influence of alcohol. And as such, that generated a massive amount of relentless media attention here in the United States and went elsewhere. But every lead story for weeks on end involved this Northwest Airlines crew that had been arrested, local and national news. I thought it would never go away. I thought it would never end. It just kept on and kept on and kept on. It's interesting today, when a young pilot or any pilot gets in trouble, you may see his face or his name on television briefly on day one, and then you never hear about it anymore because it's become an old story. But it was not when my event took place. This was a first, and it went all over. The tabloids got it, the late night comics here in the United States got on it, and just stayed and stayed and stayed on it. And I thought it would never go away. And I had not lived a life to watch it end like this. All of us have different stories. And some of the stories involve people who were basically condemned by alcohol from the early age on, and they never got to achieve anything. They never got to realize their dreams. The dreams were murdered and slaughtered by alcohol or drugs, and or both of them. And that was not my story. I had done well, really against the odds, and I'll get into that a little bit. But I had really done well. I had worked awfully, awfully hard. And my goal in life had been up to that point always to do my best, always to be the best, always to leave everything I had done with a bright, shiny coat of honor and pride and dignity and success on it. And that had really become who I was. And then in one fell swoop, in one night, with one arrest, everything got turned upside down. I lost everything in one fell swoop. You know, our stories, and as alcoholics and addicts, you know, we get bled to death along the way. We lose this, we lose that. When this happens, that happens. We have a series of personal catastrophes that eventually bring us into Alcoholics Anonymous. My story was not like that. With the exception of the 1975 experience, I had dodged a lot of bullets. Later, when I was in treatment and I was working in a very dedicated way to try to get sober, and I had to do a first step look back, I had several pages of alcohol-related incidents and events that were significant, but I paid no attention to them. I just dismissed them out of hand, and I had dodged a lot of bullets. I had several car accidents while I was drinking under the influence of alcohol. They were one-car accidents. Nobody got hurt. I managed to get the car, which was still drivable, out of the area before the police showed up. I got in some fights in bars. One of them was very serious. I almost killed a guy one night. And I woke up in places where I didn't know where I was or how I got there. On two occasions, I had lost my car. I woke up in a place I had no idea where my car was. But all of these things happened, and I just kind of shrugged them off. I just thought, well, you know, that just happens. When I got into treatment and I was really got serious about getting sober, I looked at that and I thought, my God Almighty, how could all those things happen and somebody be so blind and oblivious to them? But that's the nature of this disease. That's the nature of my disease and the way I react to it. You know, everything looks different to me today. When I look through the rear view mirror, it all looks different than it did through the windshield as I was heading for it and going through it. It's all different. I see it in the perspective that is real, that is reality-based today. But I could not do that or did not do that prior to this event on March the 8th. I spent 12 hours that day amidst this crowd of people, very highly placed Northwest management people, airport police, attorneys, both for the Airline Pilot Association, for Northwest Airlines. I gave a sworn statement and deposition, went to two different facilities and gave blood. And this was a blur. I was watching this and it was surreal. There were times I felt like I was suspended watching this happen to somebody else. This could not possibly be happening to me. This was just not how I'd lived my life. This was not supposed to happen. And then I'd have those moments of reality where I just gut grinding reality, where I'm sitting there and I'm looking at all this activity going on around me. And it's all I could do not to throw up and get sick. And I used to try to spend time describing to you the shame that I felt, the shame and the disgrace and the dishonor that I was experiencing. I couldn't believe it. And the big book talks about it in a very short, succinct way when it talks about pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. I can't be said any better than that. At the end of the day, it was over, or at least that part was over. Northwest Airlines at that time was the only major carrier in the United States that did not have a program for alcoholic pilots. Unbeknownst to the public, there was a program that started in 1973 called the HIMSS program, H-I-M-S. I'm not going to go into it, but it had been spectacularly successful in the airline industry. It operated very quietly under the public's radar. And at this point in time, as I'm sitting here today, there have been over 6,800 alcoholic pilots returned to the cockpits of America's airliners. The public is not aware of that. And to this day, up to this moment, there's never been an incident or an accident involving one of those pilots. And that's a phenomenal statistic. But Northwest had not gone along with the rest of the industry, and they had refused to do that. And I'm not blaming Northwest. Even if they had a program, I wouldn't have joined it. I would absolutely have dug my heels in and said no. I don't have a problem. Why should I even entertain this idea? But I had seen pilots get in trouble at Northwest periodically every few years, 5, 6 years. And when that happened, if it reached the company's attention, there was a massive explosion among the pilots and flight attendant ranks. And those pilots were dismissed. They were irretrievably gone. They were, and their names just ripped through our ranks like wildfire, as well as the details on when this thing had happened, where it had happened, and whatever it was that we could know about it. And over the course of that 12 hours, I had a million thoughts. And one of them was, that's how I leave here. That's my legacy. That's where my name goes on that hall of shame that I had maintained. I knew the names of the pilots before, most of them. I thought, oh my God, that's where my name goes. I got home the next morning. Actually, I called home that night when I was released. The trauma had been so great that it had not occurred to me I was supposed to be home that night. And Barbara, my wife, had waited at the Atlanta airport for 4 hours for me to show up, and then finally went home. But before she got home, I'd been released, and I called home, and I heard my voice on the answering machine, and I didn't know what to say or how to say it. And I just said in a very defeated tone, I said, there's been a disaster. I think I've lost my job. I'll be home first flight in the morning. And I don't know why Barbara didn't call me back, but I was grateful that she didn't, because I was so sick at heart. I just didn't want to talk about this. I got home the next morning. Barbara picked me up at the airport. I got in the car. I've never told a story, I don't think, without saying I had to climb over the curb to get in the car with her. I was so ashamed I couldn't even look at her. And all I could say was, honey, I'm so sorry. And she's got a very soft South Texas voice. And she said, as we pulled away from the curb, who better than I could possibly understand how you feel right now? We drove home in silence, which was another gift. I just didn't want to talk about this. And later I thought, what wife, having just learned that her husband had trashed a 22-year golden career as an airline captain, would not have said, why did you do that? You've seen this before. You knew the policy. Why did you stay and drink? Why didn't you go back to your hotel room? And those were all good questions, and I couldn't have answered one of them. I had no answer. And we drove home in silence, and she went to work, and I went inside the house, and I just couldn't stay still inside. I was just a blender of nerves and emotion, and I couldn't stay still. And a few minutes later, I called the only person I knew to call, who will get in the story here in a little bit. He was a PhD family therapist. And I called him and said, I need to declare an emergency. I need to see you right away. And he said, I'll clear the calendar. Come on over. And I probably told this story 300 times, and I can still see it. I mean, it's like a video that's in my brain right now. I can still see the color of the walls. I know the layout of the office. I know where he was standing. And I walked in, and if there was a good thing at this point, it was that I was done. This was my bottom. This destroyed me. This absolutely devastated me. So I didn't go in there and get cute with answers or minimize anything. I just told him straight out what had happened. And I remember he kind of recoiled a little bit in shock. And he said, God, Lyle, he said, this is horrible. This is just horrible. He said, but maybe this is what happened. Now I'm going to hear two statements. This is now March the 9th, Friday. I'm going to hear two statements on this particular day that I cannot mentally process. And I heard the first one when he looked at me, he said, God, Lyle, he said, this is horrible, but maybe this is what had to happen. Maybe this is what had to happen. I thought, what does that have? Where did that come from? How is that connected to anything that we have been talking about over the course of the last 2 years? And I couldn't respond. And he came back a few minutes later. He said, I want you to go see this doctor. I was on staff with him some years ago. He said, he's on the other side of Atlanta. He's a very prominent psychiatrist. He said he is himself a recovering alcoholic and cocaine addict. and he's certified in addiction medicine. And I had never even heard of addiction medicine. I did not know there was such a thing. Barbara and I drove over there, and he said he wants to see you at 6 o'clock. Now, I know doctors don't see patients at 6 o'clock on Friday evenings. And even in the mental condition that I was in, that registered. I thought there's a certain sense of urgency about this. And later, that same doctor who had made the appointment told me several years later, he said, based on your appearance, he said, I was afraid you were a suicide. And he said, it was important, imperative to get you over there right away. And so Barbara and I went over there to see that doctor, following these instructions. Now, I hadn't had anything to eat or drink for 2 days. I couldn't keep anything down. I didn't want to eat anything. I certainly didn't want anything, any alcohol to drink. I didn't want anything. But that entire meeting, in spite of the fact that I hadn't had anything to eat or drink for 2 days, that's like a very spotty blackout. I'm a blackout drinker, not all the time, but some of the times. And I have very little memory of my time there with him. I know I was there, and I know that when he asked me questions, I gave him a straight answer. And I'm sure he took a family history and he asked me all the questions any doctor would ask. And at some point in time, and I have no idea if it was 5 minutes, 15 minutes, or an hour, he looked at me and said, Lyle, he said, you're an alcoholic. You need to get into treatment tonight. And the other thing I remember is I had no reaction to that. And that's significant because I've hated alcoholics my whole life. My 2 parents were alcoholics and they died from this. I saw what happened in my family. I saw what happened in the community I grew up in. I saw what happened in the cities and the towns where I flew around. And I've hated alcoholics. And I had no internal reaction to that. And in some way that I will never, ever understand, in the 24 hours since my arrest, something way down deep inside had gotten connected, and I knew. And I told him, I said, I thought you would probably tell me that. And I said, I'm okay with it. But I said, I just got home tonight. I said, please let me go home. I said, I'd like for Barbara to just hang on to me. Let my mind uncoil. Let me absorb what's happened to me, and then I'll go into treatment. He said, you need to get into treatment tonight. And I took a breath and I looked at him. I said, okay, probably my first lesson in willingness. So Barbara and I drove back across Atlanta to a treatment center that was about 2.5, 3 miles from the Atlanta airport, a place I'd never even heard of. I had no reason to know anything about it. And I went into the treatment center that night. But before we did, we turned the final corner, and there was a sign on the corner, and the headlights swept it. And when they did, I stopped feet away from the sign with the lights shining on the sign, and it said Anchor Hospital, a hospital for alcoholism and other chemical dependencies. And with the lights on the sign in front of me and the words there and the reality of that moment, I thought, oh my God, my life ends tonight in a treatment center for alcoholics. I thought, what happened? What happened? And I couldn't come up with anything. I had a little quick mini flashback over the course of my life. These high moments, these trophy moments, these spectacular things that I thought I had achieved and accomplished that gave me so much pride and made me who I was. And all of a sudden it felt like an eraser had just wiped them all out. I sat there not even really knowing if they had actually occurred at that moment. And later I would read a summarizing paragraph at the end of a long medical report on me that said, given the history and background of this man, it was unlikely to believe he would ever be a productive member of society. And I remember flinching at that, thinking, oh my God. And then I thought, well, I'm the one that gave him all the information. And we started down the hill into the treatment center. And for the first time that day, March the 9th, for the first time, it occurred to me, oh gosh, this is my 27th wedding anniversary. Today is. And here I am 200 yards from the treatment center, my life completely destroyed. And I know it's destroyed, will never be the same, can never be the same again. I said to Barbara, hell of a way to spend an anniversary, huh? I heard the second statement that day that I could not respond to. And she said very softly, might be the best one we ever had. I could not believe that anyone could manufacture a thought like that at a moment like this. There would be no coming back from this. I had already seen what happened to the other pilots, and their situations weren't even 10% as bad as mine was and was going to become. So there was no hope. I had no hope. I knew that there would be no recovery from this. It just wasn't going to be possible. And we started down the hill into the treatment center. And I usually like to break the story up at this point and tell you a few years back, March the 9th rolled around, and unexpectedly, one of my sponsees pulled into the driveway, and we live out a little ways, and it surprised me. I said, "What are you doing here?" And it was about 9 in the morning. It was a beautiful morning here in Georgia. And he said, "Well, I've heard the story before." And he said, "I just thought I'd surprise you and Barbara and come by and wish you a happy anniversary." I said, "Well, come on in." So we went in, Barbara had coffee on, and we're talking and laughing. And he said, "Well, what's the story? What's the secret to having stayed married so long?" And before I had a chance really to respond to that, Barbara said, "I think it's mostly due to the fact that I could just never stand to admit I'd made a mistake." So that's a character defect that I really strongly encourage and support in her. Don't want to see that go away, or I want to have a place to stay. At any rate, this past March the 9th, that just passed not too long ago, was number 61 for us. And I know that's pretty good because most alcoholics talk about marriage in multiples. And I've done one thing really right. Of all the things I've done in my life wrong, the one thing I really did right was marry Barbara Prowse. So anyway, I'll break it up and tell you that when I went into treatment, I'm listening to things in there. It's a 12-step treatment center. So I'm hearing things that I'd heard 15 years ago. Keep in mind that I had absolutely zero interest in AA. I made zero effort to remember anything that was said to me during that year that I had to attend. But suddenly I'm remembering. I'm thinking, I've heard that before. They said that before. And I'm remembering those things. Now I'm really focused on getting sober. I don't know what's going to happen with the rest of my life. I know I'll never fly again. And now I need to get sober. But let me go back and just kind of fill in some blanks and tell you that I was born September 29th in 1938. So I'm 85 and a half, heading for 86. I don't feel that old. I'm still fully active. I used to say, I've still got all my parts and all of them work. And if Barbara's in the audience, I have to qualify that by saying, well, most of the time. And so I'm a passionate hunter and outdoors guy. I'm very active. We'll all wear out, and I will too, but not today. I was born in Wichita, Kansas, right in the middle of the United States. I grew up in the World War II housing project, a very economically deprived area. It was a very racially diverse area. There were blacks and whites, Hispanics, and a small Native American segment. I was part of the Native American segment. I'm a mix of several different things. The two that really enjoy the alcohol are the Irish and the Comanche parts. I see a couple of people here from Ireland. For those of you who don't know, my tribe, the Comanches, were a very powerful, very warlike, very warrior ethos centered tribe. And I was active in my native community. That's the part that I identify with most of all. I was a dancer in the powwows. I know a few of the words, not much of the language, but I know the songs and the etiquette. I was very active in my native community. And I have gone back to that since getting sober. There was no recovery effort when I grew up in the native community. A lot of drunk Indians, and I'm sure there were some traditional people, but I wasn't interested in those folks. All I wanted to do was drink and party, so I had no contact with them. But now there's a recovery movement among the Native American community here in the United States called Red Road. I know the man who started it at White Bison out in Colorado Springs, Don Sees, a tremendous guy. And it incorporates AA in the 12 steps along with Native American teachings and medicine wheel, things like that. And I'm active in that community as well. I've been to a lot of the reservations in the United States and Canada and go to some Native American sobriety events, but none of that was in place when I was growing up. At any rate, I mentioned both of my parents were alcoholics. I was 14 before the alcohol really destroyed the family. I don't remember alcohol being an issue until that time, and then at that point, that's all there was. It was just nothing but alcohol with both parents. And I was fortunate because there was no domestic violence, and I hear so much of that in some of the other stories. My dad never beat my mother. I never had to witness any of that or get involved in it. There was no screaming, yelling, fighting, throwing things. There was none of that. But what there was that alcoholic undercurrent that was always there. And I couldn't take friends over because I'd end up embarrassed. I didn't know what either one of them were going to do. It was embarrassing. And it was unpredictable. I just never knew what was going to happen. And I knew that there was a lot of problems in the marriage. And they divorced when I was 14. It was a traumatic event. I didn't see it coming, and it was traumatic. And in the next 3 years, each of them had been married and divorced 2 more times. And I didn't do well in blended families and would have clashes and conflicts. And I would bounce from family to family, and names would change, faces would change, and I didn't do well in those families. And that's kind of how I went through high school. Graduated when I was 17, and not too many people from where I came from went to college. Now, some did. I had decided I was going to join service. I didn't know what. Wichita is known as the air capital of the world because Boeing, Beech, Cessna, and a couple of other aircraft manufacturing places were there at the time. And most of my friends from high school went to work in one of those places and married their high school sweetheart, and off they went into the sunset. But I wasn't interested in doing that. And one of my buddies came back from the Marine Corps right out of boot camp, and I was really impressed. I mean, he looked good in his uniform. He was really squared away. And I sat and talked with him. We drank beer all afternoon, and he regaled me with these incredibly brutal, sadistic stories of Marine Corps boot camp, what DIs do to their recruits. I just turned 18, and I suppose it was an indication my mind wasn't working real well because I thought, man, I just can't wait to go and do those things, try that. So off I went into the Marine Corps as a barely 18-year-old kid. And there's a lot of stories, and people say I never fit in, and you won't hear that from me because I fit in. Once I got there, once I got over the initial shock of it, I fit in really well. It was the place I was looking for. It was strong. It was incredibly intense. It was incredibly demanding because that's what the Marine Corps is. And I had experienced for the first time in my life the thing that they are so well known for, that sense of camaraderie, that sense of brotherhood, that sense of belonging, that tying of one Marine to another, that brotherhood. And that captured me. I had never felt that before. And so we're coming up on the last week of boot camp. I just wanted to survive it. And the drill instructors called out the 3 names of the top guys in the platoon, and mine was the second name called. So I got a private first class stripe, and that's not much rank, but it really meant something in that particular setting. All my buddies were slick sleeve privates, and I've got that red bordered PFC stripe, and I just can't take my eyes off of it. I'd never achieved anything, accomplished anything, especially like that under those conditions. And that meant a lot to me. I continued. My next promotion was meritorious as well to Lance Corporal. I was excelling all the way through the Marine Corps. I'm drinking. I'm not going to do a big, long drunk-a-lot because I won't have time for the rest of the story. And even in the time that I'm going to be here, you're going to hear about 30% of the story, and I got to leave out about 70% of it, which is a nice problem to have because the night I entered treatment, I thought my story is about 5 minutes long. It's over before it even began. And now I've got one where I'm sitting here trying to think, I can't talk about this, I can't do that, I got to skip to this. And that's nice. And that's all the result of Alcoholics Anonymous and the miracles that I've gotten to experience. At any rate, 4.5 years into my enlisted time, let me bounce back to the drunk-a-lot thing. I've got one, and I mentioned parts of it earlier. And the thing in mine, the thing I find interesting around the speakers is our drinking patterns are all varied. You know, I can go to an AA conference and there's 4 or 5 speakers, and I can sit there and I can pick out the differences. I never hit alcohol. One of the things I never did was drink in the mornings. And I was convinced all alcoholics drank in the mornings. That was one more indication that I was not and could not be an alcoholic. I couldn't drink for 3 days at a time. People talk about going on a 3-day drunk or a 2-week drunk. I couldn't do that. But when I did drink, I drank until there was no more alcohol or the bar closed. I don't remember ever drinking and not getting drunk. And that's probably a flawed memory, or I'd be dead. But I do not ever remember just having a few drinks and going home, or having a few drinks and being okay and stopping there. Once I start drinking, I drink until it's gone, or until they shut the place down. I never drank. I never thought I drank because I had to. I just think I drink because I like to, which was a lie I told myself, and I still laugh when I hear people talk about that. But that's how I drank. And the first thing that I identified with once I got into treatment was when they talked about loss of control after what happens the first drink. And I go, oh my gosh, that's me all the way through. And I identified with every other symptom they had, preoccupation and all the other stuff. I knew when I landed in cities in the United States, I don't care where it was. I knew where the nearest liquor store was. I knew which ones were open on Sundays. I knew which ones closed at 8 or 9. I knew how long it took me to change clothes, get up there, get a bottle of booze, and get back to my room in every city. So anyway, I'm 4.5 years into my Marine Corps time, and my commanding officer calls me and says there's a brand new program out. And he said they're taking, it's called a cadet program, and you're the only guy in the unit whose entry score is high enough to go test for that program if you'd like to fly airplanes. And I jumped at that. I'd always wanted to fly airplanes, but that was not anywhere close on my close-up radar scope. Pilots had to have college, I thought, and they certainly didn't come out of a World War II housing project. They didn't come out of a Native American segment, and they didn't come out of an alcoholic home. But he's telling me I can go test. I went and tested, and I passed. And he said, there's some things you need to know. He said, this is an 18-month program. And he said, roughly speaking, half don't make it through. And he says, you're coming in as a very tiny minority, coming in as an enlisted Marine taking a test. 99% of these people come in from the civilian side, and they've got to have 2 years college minimum just to enter this program. Well, if half don't make it, I already know that I'm starting off way behind, and I stand a good chance of not making it. And I said, well, I want to try. So I went home. He said, okay. So I went home to Wichita. There was a powwow going on. I'm going to Pensacola the next morning. They called for an honoring dance for me. I went out and led that dance because I'm off to a bright future. I've got a wonderful future ahead of me. They're honoring me with this dance. And for the next 18 months, that's all I could think about, because I thought I cannot go back as a failure. I can't go back washed out. I can't go back and tell them I'm home early because I didn't make it. Because I'm the only one in this entire community that's have this opportunity for this wonderful thing to get a set of gold wings and gold bars and this wonderful, glamorous opportunity and profession that's ahead of me. I cannot go back as a failure. And I was driven with that. And for the 18 months, there were 4 phases. I was always the number 2 guy. And every time it happened, it surprised me. And I never got cocky or confident or complacent. I was always convinced that I'm going to wash out because I'm watching my friends go left, right, and center, and we're losing people. And their dreams are over, and they're gone, and they're shattered. And one of these days, I think that's going to be me. So I just keep working. On the last 6 months, I went to Beeville, Texas for advanced jet flight training, left Florida. Night I got in there, I got drunk with all my buddies. We went to a hotspot drive-in where all the local girls hung out because we were cadets, and we thought we had an inside track with them. They went after a carload of girls. I hung back and drank some more because I wasn't that gutsy or courageous with the girls till I had a lot to drink. I approached the driver in the car, couldn't tell really well what she looked like because of the angle, but I'd rehearsed a bunch of things I thought were really spiffy, and went up there, and she looked at me. She was really pretty, and everything that I'd been rehearsing vacated, and I didn't know where it had gone, and I had nothing to say, and I really should have been practicing talking because I was drinking a lot. And I saw a beautiful face with brown eyes. It came out sideways. I said, oh, yes, something like that. And she looked at me like I just peed on the side of her car, and I was embarrassed. I turned around and walked away, and that's it. And I'm back there drinking. A little while later, she gets out to go into the ladies' room, and I saw her, and she had a pair of turquoise shorts on, a really cute little rear end and pretty legs. And I had an AA thought, and I didn't know it was an AA thought, but I was watching her walk in, and I recognized the thought 29 years later when I heard it, because I was watching her walk in, and I thought, my God, I really want what she has, and I'm willing to go to any length to get it. And the next day I had a chance encounter with her. She had a girlfriend, I had a buddy with me, and I walked in and saw her and bought her a cup of coffee. I was nervous, but I was sober, and she told me her name was Barbara, and we started to date. And she was the most wholesome girl that I'd ever met. And on February the 25th of 1963, her 20th birthday, she pinned a set of gold wings over my heart, 2 gold bars on my chest. I mean, two gold bars on my shoulders. I had completed this task, and I had done well. I could go home with my head up and with a sense of honor that I had achieved this and accomplished this. And I had this good-looking girl who kind of thought I was okay. So we went home to Wichita for a 3-week leave, and she stayed with my sister while I stayed with my dad, who was in bad shape. And at the end of the 3 weeks, I said, "You're going home to Texas. I've got orders to California. Let's go down to Oklahoma and get married." So we went down. There was no waiting period in Oklahoma. So we went down to Oklahoma, a little town called Newkirk, Oklahoma, stood in front of the Justice of Peace with 2 rings that a couple had loaned us that went down there with us. And we got married March the 9th, 1963. And that started our life together. I had a spectacular career in the Marine Corps for the time that I was in. We were one of the first squadrons into Vietnam. And we immediately had 2 little boys, 8 days less than a year apart. No, we're not Catholic. We're just horny Protestants. And so Barbara took those 2 little babies home to Texas while I went to Vietnam. And we were in the first, we were 50 miles south of Da Nang in a little primitive airstrip called a Combat Expeditionary Airstrip. First time the Marine Corps had ever used it. And we were surrounded by Marines in foxholes. We were living in sand, in tents and sand, and the temperatures 100, 110 degrees, eating food called sea rations out of little cans, flying off an airstrip that was half of what we needed, built by the Seabees, and using jet assist takeoff bottles to get airborne for combat operations, landing into carrier gear since we were all carrier qualified. And we accordingly acquitted ourselves extraordinarily well. I mean, we did a really good job and did it under really harsh, difficult circumstances. I was with 28 of the finest men I'll ever be my privilege and my honor to be with in my entire lifetime. I applied for a regular commission while I was over there, knowing they were competitive, and they only gave those out to officers that had college degrees or were very close. I knew mine wasn't going to go anywhere, and to my surprise, I got a regular commission. And they were very competitive. So now I had something guaranteed me a career in the Marine Corps. I had a wonderful career in the Marine Corps. Unlike Sandy Beach, who was a good friend of mine, and some other of my friends who left the military under a cloud of disgrace because of alcoholism. My alcoholism didn't hit me big time until I was completely out of there. So I managed to do well while I was in the military. I had a very enviable resume. I hated to get out, but it looked like I was going to be gone from my wife and kids 4 to 6 years if I stayed until I could retire, and I didn't want to do that. And so 3 weeks after I got out, I was in class at Northwest Airlines. And for 22 years at Northwest Airlines, I had the same kind of career. I loved what I did. I was good at it. I loved the people I worked with. We got to Northwest. Barbara said she wanted a little girl. And so we decided to adopt. It's been 14 months. We already had 2 boys, so we had this little additional struggle. We spent 14 months battling really hard, and we brought this little Indian girl home. We named her Dawn. She was 17 days old when she came to live in my house. Most beautiful little girl I've ever seen. And I'd always felt sorry for dads that had daughters. I had 2 boys, and I never said anything to my buddies that were having girls. I felt like saying, "Oh, that's too bad. That's a shame. I got 2 sons." But I found out what little girls do to their dads and how full my life was because she came into it. She was the most beautiful little thing I've ever seen. And when she started to walk, she couldn't get past me without me scooping her up and looking in her face and saying, "Thanks for being my girl." And she'd say, "Thanks for being my dad." I loved her so much. She was just the center of my universe. And when she was 17, she ran away from home. And I didn't see it coming, neither did Barbara. It just blindsided us. I don't know if I hadn't been drinking, if that would have happened or not. I simply don't know. The problem is I didn't drink every night. I didn't get drunk every weekend. I worked hard to vary my drinking patterns. I didn't beat my wife or abuse my kids, at least not physically. So I didn't see any of this coming. And I put off being a captain for 2 years because I didn't want to be gone as a junior captain. I want to be there until my girl graduates from high school and goes to college. And I was so happy, so proud that I could send my kids to college. And she was coming up on graduation. I went to Chicago to take a special written test. And that afternoon when Barbara took me to the airport, she and a couple of her friends while Barbara was gone to the airport, I went in and got what she wanted and left a runaway note. And Barbara found it late that night and couldn't call me. The next day I called home and I knew something was wrong. She told me Dawn had run away from home, and I just panicked. My God, my little girl is gone. I don't know what's happened to her, where she's at. So I blurted out where to go and who to call and where to look. And got on the airplane, and 2 hours later I was back in Atlanta. And I don't know what happened to me on that flight. I'm not aware of anything. But I know when I landed, instead of being afraid and concerned about my daughter, all of that had changed and turned to hatred. I hated her. My God, I hated her with a hatred that was so white hot I can't describe it. And I told Barbara, I said, I don't care if she dies in the streets. She'll never come back to my home. And I never want her name mentioned again, not in my presence by anyone. No one in the family, none of our friends. And within 2 days, everything that she'd ever owned or touched in my home was gone to Goodwill. It had been donated. There was no physical trace she'd ever been in my home. I went to an attorney and I gave him $500 and disowned her. I tried to annul the adoption and couldn't. I was just a raging tornado of white hot hatred over this little girl that I had loved so much. And in a way that's only insanely amusing, as an alcoholic, I looked around and I thought, I don't think Barbara's handling this too well. She probably needs a therapist. So I got in the phone book, the Yellow Pages, and I pulled out the name of this PhD doctor therapist. And by the luck of the draw, I got a good one. We saw him twice a month for almost 2 years. And I didn't like talking about my daughter. And one time when he was trying to get me to talk about her, I made a statement, a one-sentence statement that absolutely portrayed who I was and how I operated. And I said, I'm going to tell you something, doctor. I said, I would rather hate than hurt. And he said, you survived a childhood doing that. And if you continue, it'll destroy you. And he was right. And as I get into treatment, I thought, that's what I've done. I avoid pain. I'm a man. Pain is not a manly feeling. I avoid pain by calling up anger. And when I call up anger, the walls are high enough and thick enough, pain does not penetrate because I'm angry and I'm not going to feel the pain. And that's exactly what I've been doing. And Barbara suffered as a result of that. And I made amends to her for that. A week to the day that I got into treatment, we walked into, several things happened on that day. The news media announced on television, which I would not go near, but other people would report to me, that I'd been terminated by Northwest Airlines, as I should have been. The FAA had issued something that they never did. They issued an emergency revocation of all my flight certificates, so they're gone. I've lost my FAA medical because of the diagnosis of alcoholism, so I'm stripped bare. I have no professional credentials at all, and I have no education to fall back on. So I'm done. And we walk into a room to talk, a group therapy room, and they close the door. 8 or 10 of us in there. For some reason, which is totally counterintuitive to me, I began to talk about my daughter, and I no longer had that wall of anger up. And I broke down and cried. And I didn't even cry. I didn't cry. I didn't cry at my parents' funerals. I didn't cry. But on that day, I didn't have the pain to shield anything with, and my heart broke, and I sobbed in front of about 8 or 10 people, and I was so ashamed and embarrassed. It was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me in treatment. It was one of the greatest breakthroughs for me to finally feel pain like I'm supposed to feel it. And I got a hold of Barbara, and I said, let's put the family back together again. There were no phone calls and no visiting privileges in this treatment center. But the counselor said that was such an impossible breakthrough for me that they would grant us a day room and an opportunity to bring the family back if Barbara could make that happen. And a few days later, I saw Barbara in the day room. Dawn was there, my little girl. She had a 5-month-old baby in her hands that I didn't know much of anything about. She got married, and I didn't even know her last name. My 2 sons were there. The 2 doctors had asked if they could please come watch this. And they were off to the side by the wall. And my other sons, my 2 sons were there. And I wish I could describe to you what it felt like for me after 2 years of hate. And I didn't remember. My daughter was smaller than I remembered. I can't tell you what it felt like to dispel the hatred and to walk across that room and put my arms around my little girl and tell her how much I loved her instead of how much I hated her. Already, in the short time that I'd been there, recovery is starting to take place. I'm starting to see things differently, and I didn't think that was possible. As I go through the treatment experience, they start coming to me with bad news on the legal front. None of the attorneys on the day of the arrest thought there would be any legal consequences. I knew the FAA would react, and they certainly did, but nobody believed there was any legal consequences. Now they're starting to come to me every 2 or 3 days apart and pull me out of a group and tell me that the latest bad news. And they're telling me that Minnesota's indicted me. I'm looking at 90 days in jail on a misdemeanor charge. North Dakota indicts me. I'm looking at 6 months there imprisonment on a misdemeanor charge. Then the counts double. They're everything, and they're coming in there every 2 or 3 days. For 6 times they do that. And finally, the 6th time they take me out, there's a doctor standing at the door getting ready to go down there. And I thought, oh my God, they've never had a doctor. I go down to his office. My counselor's there. He makes me sit down. He said, I have to tell you, the federal grand jury, the United States government has just now indicted you. You're looking at 15 years in federal prison, a $250,000 fine, and an attorney's coming in Sunday and wants $50,000. We went broke within 30 days of the arrest. I'm now broke. I grew up that way. Now I've taken Barbara with me. I didn't have the money for an attorney. And he says, I have to ask if you're going to hurt yourself. And I said, no. And I walked back to my room. I'm numb. It's like every nerve in my body has shut down and just gone. I'm numb. 15 years in federal prison. 15 years. And I go back to my room and I collapse. I don't remember falling, but I remember my head being on the side of the carpet, and I'm crying again for the 2nd time. And all I'm saying is, God, I can't do this anymore. I don't have enough left for even one more time. Not even one more time. I said, please help me. And I slept that night. I had many life-changing experiences in treatment because now I'm ready to get sober. And the only reason I do these things, these talks, is because I had wonders. I had questions. Does the 12-step stuff really work once I leave the treatment center? What about when I leave an AA meeting? Does it really work in the streets and the sidewalks of America and these other places? Does it really work? And the answer is yes, it does. And that's why I'm here. I got out of treatment, and now, there's many things that happened while I was in there, life-changing events for me, but that's because I'm ready to get sober. That's because I'm listening this time. I'm not arrogant. I'm not angry. I'm listening to what they're telling me, and I'm trying to believe that this is going to work. And I want to know how to do these 12 steps. I'm immediately in a heavily publicized trial in the United States. But we drew the toughest judge in the entire Minnesota Federal District. None of the attorneys were happy about this. And I knew things weren't, I knew I was going to be found guilty. As a matter of fact, I wanted to plead guilty. My attorney talked me out of it for reasons that made sense. They told me in treatment, you're going to have to learn to trust people. You're going to have to learn to ask for help, and you're going to have to learn to trust people. And so I'm trying. And so I said, okay, but I said, I'll be found guilty. And when I am, I want you to know it'll be okay. I've got an advantage over the other 2 guys because I'm an alcoholic and they're not. And at night, if we're not involved in legal things, I can go to an AA meeting, which was scary because I'm all over television. The minute I walk into an AA room, they all recognize me. They all know who I am. And it takes me a little while to settle and to understand that I'm in a safe place. And I never shared in these meetings. I just sat and listened. But there's an air in those rooms, and there's a power in those rooms. And I would take those back to the courtroom the next day. I'm being portrayed as the most worthless piece of crap on the face of the planet. There is nothing good to be said about me. And the tabloids are picking it up. The TV's picking it up. Everybody's papers, everybody's picking it up. And I can't respond. And once in a while, I look across the courtroom, and Barbara's eyes meet mine, and she will mouth the words, I love you. And I'll nod, and I'll be okay. I'll get through the day. I'll get through that day. The jury goes out, and the jury comes back. There's the 3-week trial. The judge has strong feelings about this case, and I see them. I see them very, very clear. And I don't begrudge him that. He's entitled to those. I am aware. I take responsibility that I am the most egregious example of a betrayal of the public trust that there has been up to that point in time, and there's never been a close second since then. I know that. I know that everything that comes to me is fair and appropriate and that I deserve it. But that doesn't make it easy. The jury goes out and the jury comes back in very quickly, and I know what that probably means. I'm the captain, so everything comes to me first. And I stand up for the verdict, guilty. My attorney's standing there next to me, and I see him flinch, jerked a little bit and flinched. And I just reached over and kind of patted him on his knee with him down at the ball. I said, "It's okay. It's okay." We go back a month later. These legal things can get drawn out. Most of you are aware of that. Mine didn't because of the public pressure and the. I was arrested on March the 8th. I was in a federal courtroom in July and August. I was sentenced in October, and I was in federal prison in December. My thing went very, very quickly. We go back for the sentencing in October, and my attorney notifies me. He said, "Oh my God," he said, "I've got bad news." He said, "The sentencing guidelines that are in place are 12 months to 18 months. I knew that, and I knew I was going to get 18 months because I was the captain. There was an algebraic formula that goes into how they compute all of this. And I knew that I was going to get 18 months. He says, and there was no suspended sentence. Prison was mandatory, and I knew that as well. He said, the judge has just notified all of us, including the media, that he's going to depart upwards from the guidelines, and he can go all the way to 15 years if he wants to. And I'd seen this judge. I knew it was going to be a big sentence. And I felt that terror that went all the way to my bone marrow. I experienced it so many times, and here it came again. And I told Barbara, I said, step one, I'm powerless. I'm powerless over what he's going to do. The other thing is the serenity prayer. I have to accept the things I cannot change, and this is one of them. So I went and I said, this is going to be bad. So we walked into the courtroom that morning, October the 26th of 1990, and I gave her my personal effects. I said, I don't think I'll be coming back. The judge asked, he lectures on what he's getting ready to do, and then it's my turn to speak. And I stand, I'm so scared, I don't even know what to say. And I talked about being grateful to be sober. I was grateful for what happened in my family. I had accepted responsibility for this, and I couldn't change anything. I couldn't change what happened yesterday, much less what happened several months earlier. And he announced a sentence on me of 16 months, 2 months less under the guidelines than anybody was expecting. And I was shocked. I knew that something had happened. I'd been in treatment with a federal judge who told me, he said, when we go to the sentencing, he said, the sentence is set. He said, no matter what you say, when we walk in there, we never change from the bench. And judges around the country have corroborated that. So over the years, they've told me that's so. And so I knew that whatever it was he was going to do no matter what I said. And 16 months. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, I'll never understand what just happened. I knew a miracle had happened that morning in the courtroom. A couple of years later, he told my attorney in chambers, he says, I was going to sentence Lyle to 4 years in federal prison. But he said when he stood and he talked, and I thought of him more as a human being, and I thought about his service in Vietnam, he said, I came down to 16 months. To this day, the other two defendants do not know that they were slated to go into prison for 3 years until he reduced mine, because I got 25% more, and they ended up with 12 months. Then he did something that nobody expected. He said, this is a very complex case. It was not designed for pilots. There'll be appeals. And he said, I'm going to let you men remain free until your appeals are exhausted. And the other two said, okay. I said, no, I'll go now. The judge later told my attorney, he said, I was lost for words. He said, no defendant before or since has ever done that when he could stay out on an appeal pending. I knew I could stay out for a year, 18 months. But I also knew that eventually the appeals don't, I had a 5% statistical chance of appeal. And even if I was successful, all I got was another trial, and I couldn't afford another trial. And I told my kids, I said, I can't come out the back door till I go in the front. And I knew that even if I stayed out every night when the sun went down, I'm one day closer to what's eventually going to happen. And I remembered something somebody later told me, Shakespeare, it was from Shakespeare, but I don't know, it's English literature, something, said, a coward dies 1,000 deaths, a brave man only one. And I'm not going to watch the sun go down every night for a year and die another death. I'm going in now and I'm going to get it over with. And I told my kids, I said, I can't come out the back door till I go in the front. And I'm going to do that. I'd never been in an American penitentiary, and I'm scared. But I also remembered the Marine Corps told me courage is not the absence of fear. It's the ability to continue in the face of it. And that's now my job, is to walk in that front door of a federal penitentiary, and I did it. I did it on December the 5th of 1990, 34 years to the day that I'd become a Marine. I entered Marine Corps boot camp. I became inmate 04478-041. I spent 424 days in the federal prison system, the sick obscenity of our correction system, one day at a time, shorter when necessary. And I think I handled it well. And I only did it because of the 12 steps, because I had this recovery foundation underneath me. And inmates would come up to me and go, how come they can't get to you? And here come this and how come that? I say, you'll never understand it. It has something to do with the 12 steps in the Serenity Prayer. So I don't like what goes on in here, but I can't change it. And I can't let them change me. And so for 420, then the judge, I missed this. The judge put sanctions on me to make sure I never flew again, ever. I was never to see the inside of a cockpit again. I got through the 12 months or the 424 days, 16 months. I had 52 days good conduct time by law. So it was a little bit over 14 months, 424 days. I came out, I was broke. I would never fly again. I was the most notorious pariah in all of American commercial aviation history. Everybody knew my name. Every alcoholic had been in the headlines. I'm a convicted felon. There's no chance I'll fly again. And so I'm heavily involved in Alcoholics Anonymous now. And I start watching the miracles change. I went back to work at the treatment center that saved my life. I spent almost 2 years there, 20 months there, working there. I'm making $14,000 a year. I don't know how we lived on that. I have no idea how we lived on that. And yet I'm grateful for that job. Barbara's working and making $6 now. I don't know how we survived. I really don't. At any rate, I start dreaming about flying again. The FAA then came to me and said, if you want to fly again, you'll start with a private license, literally from the bottom up. None of my pilots thought that was fine, but I thought it was possible. I'd come out of the Marine Corps, I'd been immediately given a commercial license with an instrument rating. They're telling me, you got to start with right at the bottom. Then I look at the money, I go, there's no way I can do that. But I took the written test, I studied for those, and that was hard. And in 10.5 months, I'd passed the writtens on all of those written exams. But I can't do the flying. I've got no money. The pilot at Northwest got a hold of me. He said, I have a flight school you're not aware of. He said, it's 50 miles north of the Twin Cities. I want you to come up, live with me and my family, go through my flight school free. So I did. I went up there and I'm under 13 conditions of probation. So I got to check in with Minnesota Department of Corrections. And I lived with that man for 44 days, rained out 14 days, and I never slowed down, never quit studying. I flew 78 hours the remaining 30 days, and that's a lot of flying in a little airplane. I got 4 licenses back, 2 by 11:15 one morning. I don't think that's ever been done. And when I'm not flying at night, guess where I am? I'm in an AA meeting in one of those small farming communities that surrounds Buffalo, Minnesota, because that's where I belong now. That's what's taken me to the dance. That's what's given me my life, and that's where I go. I came back from there with 4 licenses, but I told Barbara, I said, I'll never fly on American soil, not with the notoriety and the infamy that I've got. And a month later, the licenses actually arrived in the mail, and within an hour, a pilot called me from Northwest, head of the pilot union. A grievance had been filed. I had not activated the grievance. I was not going to fight my termination. Northwest was justified in terminating me, and I knew it. And he said, this is the best phone call I've ever made, because he said 3 hours ago, John Dasberg, president and CEO of Northwest Airlines, the president and CEO of a 50,000-man airline, worldwide airline, whom I'd never even seen, made a decision to bring me back and put me into full flight status at Northwest. And I sat there with tears flooding my cheeks, unable to believe the message that had just come through the phone. I'm going back to the same airline that I'd so horribly, egregiously shamed and disgraced and embarrassed. And I'm going to fly again. And I went back and I signed a back to work agreement a couple of months later, never to be a captain again. And I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that. I can't believe I'm going to be given back a little bit of retirement. Oh my God, I'm going to be able to make a living. I'm going to have some money I can't believe it. And then I find out that John Dasberg's father is an alcoholic who couldn't stay sober. And then I think to myself, does he understand? He must understand. If I go back and relapse, and there's publicity, and I'm sure there would be, the board of directors will expel him so fast he won't have time to pack his desk. Does he understand the risk he is taking? To say nothing about the media backlash that he thought was going to come. There was a level of courage and compassion that it surpasses all understanding. So I went back and I spent the next 4 years, almost 5 years, flying for Northwest, and I was a sober pilot. Northwest now had a program, and I'm part of that as well. I was overwhelmingly welcome back. There's always a small faction that doesn't want to see us get well, that always wants to keep their foot on our neck and our face in the mud. But that's a small group overall, I think, because I was overwhelmingly welcome back. As I go through the rest of all of this, now I'm going to be the best employee. My aviation credentials were always excellent, and I had outstanding credentials in that regard. So the flying part was never an issue for me. I always had a great reputation. But now I want to be the best employee for John Dasberg, and I never want him to have an ounce of regret for bringing me back. And I dedicated myself to that, and I think I did a good job. And he would call me in once a year just to talk with me. I got to know him unlike any other pilot on the entire property. I got to know John Dasberg very well because he'd call me in with another, and he'd have his right-hand man there, and we would talk and just talk about anything. I had no fear because I had no secrets, I had nothing to fear. I used it all up because of AA. I had no secrets and nothing to hide. As I'm coming up on my last year at Northwest, I'm speaking at United Airlines. I get a phone call late at night, woke Barbara and me up. He said, same pilot. And he said, guess what? John Dasberg, in spite of the back to work agreement that you signed saying you'd never be a captain again, he thinks you need to be a 747 captain when you come home for your last year at Northwest Airlines. And that's what happened. I spent my last year as a 747 captain, full giving back the first thing we lose and the most golden gift of all, trust. Trust. He trusted me in a mega $1 million airplane with 400 passengers and 18 flight attendants to fly all over the world because I was a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said that. And he said that. I retired honorably at age 60, and now it's 65. And within a day or so, my attorney called and he said, Judge Rosenbaum is now chief judge of the Minnesota Federal District. He just called me and he said, in 16 years on the federal bench, he's never supported a petition for pardon. But if you want one, he will support yours. I had never considered such a thing. And the judge wrote an emotional 3-page affidavit and said, resides in my safe over here, that if I had to read it in front of you, I'd have tears in my eyes by the time I get to page 3. It's an incredible document written by the man who sent me to prison. And 2 years later, I came walking in and 8 phone messages telling me I just received a presidential pardon from Bill Clinton. Getting the pardon from a governor of one of our states over here is almost impossible. Getting a pardon from the president is 10 times more so. And mine is framed over here on the wall. Full and unconditional pardon for Norman Lyle Prowse, granted by William Jefferson Clinton. Normally, I would end my story here because it's on such a high, spectacular note, but I need to tell you something. That life gets lifey. We live life, and life gets better when we're sober. It sure does. And I've just told you about mine. But life continues to happen. And 3 years ago, when I was sitting exactly where I am right now, I had a phone call from a neurologist we were seeing, and he said, I have to tell you, that Barbara's spinal fluid is tested positive for Alzheimer's. And the bottom of my world dropped out. But thank God I'm sober. Thank God I'm sober. She walked in here and I had to tell her. And she had tears in her eyes. And I hugged her and she said, I just hope this isn't something I pass to our children. And I said to her, I said, honey, I'd give anything if it was me instead of you. And she squeezed me and hugged me tighter. And she said, oh no. She said, you'll be able to get along without me, but I could never get along without you. We are doing some things to fight this, and I don't know if we'll win or we'll lose. But we're in the courage to change the things we can. I won't sit and do nothing and watch it happen. I know the medical solution for this, which is none. You take some pills and then you die, as you end up with your memory and your brain completely rotted. We're fighting it. Maybe we'll lose. Probably we will. Maybe we will. But I won't sit and do nothing. And 34 years ago, when my life burned to the ground and I was standing in the middle of it, she never flinched. And now it's my turn to be here for her. And I'm so grateful to Alcoholics Anonymous, to all of you, and to everyone who's helped me, that I can be here and do this for her. You know, I hear people talk about it's God's will. No, it isn't. You can believe that if you want. I believe God had tears in his eyes the afternoon that I had them in mine when I got the use. We live here in a free-flowing world with free will, where we poison the land, the air, and the water, and we eat things that aren't good for us, and we chase the almighty dollar, and we don't rest, and we don't exercise, and things happen in our lives. Genes change and mutate, and bad things happen. And I don't think we were singled out for this. I don't think we were singled out for this. And if I want to blame God for it and make him my problem, then he can never be my solution. So I think that God is there for me, and he's there for Barbara, and he'll help us deal with this just like it does when we talk about step 11, praying only for knowledge of his will and the power to carry that out. I want to close with something that I try to usually close with, because I believe it addresses life as I've come to know it. Simply says this: I do not wish you joys without a sorrow, nor endless day without the healing dark, nor brilliant sun without the restful shadow, nor tides that never turn against your bark. I wish you strength and faith and love and wisdom and goods, gold enough to help some needy one. I wish you songs, but also blessed silence and God's sweet peace when every day is done. My Comanche name is Yatzitanap, means flying man, but you know me as Lyle, and I'm an alcoholic. I want to thank you for my life. I want to thank you for my sobriety. Thank you, Alcoholics Anonymous. That's all I've got.
Thank you so much, Lyle. You done the same thing the last time to me. You'd be all emotional. I'd be forever grateful for what Alcoholics Anonymous has done for me and my family. I'm over here in The Hague with people that I met on Zoom, and they're closer to me than my family ever was. I've Mick the Ferret there, a man that I met on Zoom. It's like a granddad to me. When I do service, we do it together. We're like a tag team, myself and Mick. But I just love what Alcoholics Anonymous can do. If you reach out, you have to reach out and grab hold of this. And the minute you grab somebody's hand, they'll hold it, they'll drag you along. I want to thank you so much, Lyle. Mick, have you anything to say?
My name's Mick and I am an alcoholic, and Lyle, I loved it. When you said that when you went to the hospital and it said about alcoholics recovery, and you know, you thought your life was over. When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous and first stopped drinking, you know, you gave me a new life, a life that was beyond has been beyond my wildest dream. And my sobriety date is the 24th of the 12th, 75. And I'm proud of it. I don't shout it out much, but in America, they like to say about their sobriety day. That sobriety day has been given to me through you wonderful people. God bless you all. Over to you, Mossy.
Thanks, Mick. I want to thank all the co-hosts that were with us this evening. Especially thank you, Lyle. Fantastic meeting. Sean is going to do the promises for us.
I'm Sean, I'm an alcoholic. Promises. If we're painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we're halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past. We wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we'll see how our feelings can benefit others.
That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change.
Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will sometimes realise that God is doing for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises?
We think.
We think not.
We think not. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialise if we work for them.
That's beautiful, Sean. Yes, absolutely beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Sean, Lyle, for sharing it.
And that's it, folks. Lyle, will you lead us out with the serenity prayer?
Let's have a moment of silence for the folks who aren't with us, but need to be, or maybe didn't make it this far on the journey. Serenity prayer. God,
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 grant
Give
us
us serenity.
Serenity,
Accepting
things
things
I
cannot
cannot change,
Courage to
change
change
the things I
things
can,
the
the
wisdom to
wisdom
know
the
the
wisdom
difference.
to do this. God bless you all.
Thank you.
Thank
God
you,
bless
thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
thank
Good
you.
night. See you tomorrow.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye.
God bless.